Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello and welcome to this 20th module in the series Marketing Management, a VUCA perspective. We are discussing fundamentals, and I am your friend and your co-partner in this journey, Siddhiprad Bhattacharya. We've discussed a lot about a variety of things ranging from the basics of VUCA, the basics of marketing management, and we have delved into the minds of consumers. Now, we want to understand what really goes on inside minds of consumers, and so therefore, taking from the great French philosopher René Descartes, he says that we do not describe the world, we see. We see the world we can describe. Any amount of input coming from a human perspective is always colored by our worldview. And that is typically where the problem starts. We need to understand what goes on behind the defined perspective that any human being offers, and most of all, consumers. Marketers are constantly behind that particular holy grail, which they try and understand in terms of the quality of the actual insight that goes on inside consumers' minds. Which brings us into a dive into the consumer psyche and understanding how things that go on in people's minds motivate them to buy or stay away from certain brands, and therefore the drivers that are actually going to affect consumer purchase behavior. Qualitative exploratory research works with the reasoning and influencing factors that drive human decision making and actions, and that is what we'll be probing into here in today's qualitative research module. So, qualitative research is an exploratory methodology based on small, unstructured samples aimed at gaining insights and deeper understanding of a problem. It plays a key role in exploratory research, similar to secondary data analysis, where we take all data points from various published and syndicated pieces of research. And this is often used to define the problems or develop a suitable research approach. In approach development, qualitative research helps generate hypotheses, what we want to find out whether it's true or not, and then identify relevant variables. What is the change that we foresee? When quantitative or conclusive research is not conducted, qualitative research combined with secondary data becomes the project's cornerstone. Here we explore the differences between the qualitative and quantitative research approaches, their roles in market research, and a classification of qualitative methods in this particular module. And key techniques such as focus groups, depth interviews, and projective techniques are also covered here. First and foremost, let's try and understand the weighing of how qualitative versus quantitative actually measures up in the research scenario. So here we understand the differences and the reasons why each or any of these research types are then selected by marketers and their market research teams to actually delve deeper into the problem as such. We had actually looked at the entire research process in our previous conversation, and here in the research design aspect is where we really find the qualitative research aspect come up. When we are probing the qualitative research aspects within it, we see there are lots of parts to the entire offering. So, in terms of aspects, we see that in order to find out a purpose why people do certain things, to find out a certain approach, the key techniques which we'll employ, and the kind of output that we want to get out of it, we look at qualitative research vis-a-vis quantitative research and understand what each does. So, when it's the purpose, qualitative research helps us to explore and understand reasons behind certain incidents, whilst quantitative research helps us to quantify and analyze how much or where or when that certain incident has happened. Approach-wise, qualitative is exploratory, whilst quantitative is more conclusive. In terms of application and key techniques, qualitative research goes into interviews and focus groups, whereas quantitative research goes into surveys and experiments. Qualitative research takes up insights as the output, whereas quantitative research gives you statistical results. If we delve deeper in terms of the objective, qualitative research gives us qualitative understanding of underlying reasons and motivations of why people behave in a certain way, act in a certain way, whereas quantitative research quantifies the data and generalizes the result, providing a certain kind of trend, if you will, from a large enough sample size to the population of interest, because at the end of the day, we project the sample back onto the larger intended target audience. In terms of sampling, qualitative research takes a very small number of non-representative cases, whereas qualitative research takes a larger number of representative cases. Data collection wise, qualitative is unstructured, quantitative is the opposite. Data analytics wise, quantitative is statistical, whereas qualitative is more reason based, non-statistical inputs. And in terms of an outcome, you develop an initial understanding of a problem with qualitative research, whereas in quantitative research, you tend to figure out or recommend a next course or final course of action. In terms of primary data which comes to any market researcher, we need to understand the nature of it. So, qualitative wise, insights and context setting is what primary data in terms of qualitative research provides us. And in terms of quantitative, we seek to quantify these data points and use statistical analysis for further understanding in depth. And in terms of the research flow, you typically start with the qualitative research. Why you do so? So that you understand the problem's context and then explore the underlying issues, which you then expand into a survey form and apply across the sample size. Here, you validate findings which you found from qualitative research, and the results are then generalized using, like we spoke of, statistical methods. Now, when to use qualitative research? For new or non-routine projects where you are trying to figure out exact moorings of where things are, why people have been acting in a certain way. In case you don't even know what they are, you can use exploratory research to try and delve deeper into the subject. Here, if you are launching a new product or exploring new customer behaviors, it becomes very, very helpful. And for routine or repeated projects, you can get monthly satisfaction or no contextual change kind of responses from customers. Again, where it could be in the problem of being misused, qualitative research at times treats qualitative findings as conclusive or generalizable, which is something that should be avoided. So, you get your context and insights and you then validate and generalize with quantitative. The complementary research of both these research models are that they should work together and not compete amongst each other in terms of formats. Again, a holistic approach ensures that accurate problem solving and data driven decision making is what your final end marketing research goal leads you to. Now, let's look at various procedures which form part of the entire offering from qualitative research perspectives. First, we'll get into focused group discussions. These are one of the most widely used formats when it comes to qualitative research, and typically what you do is you get a group size of about 8 to 12 respondents, and that composition is generally homogeneous. So, you typically bring people in from a certain walk of life with a certain kind of earning and a certain geographic location, certain socioeconomic standing and such. And these respondents are pre-screened, which means you have to get them in previously through an interview. An interview to qualify as the correct kind of audience for that particular group discussion. Here, you will typically get them to sit in a relaxed and informal atmosphere and have a nice conversation with them as a group. The typical time duration for such exercises is typically scheduled from an hour to about 3 hours. And typically this is also audio and video recorded for later reference purposes. There is a moderator who has more of an observational role. They actually facilitate the interpersonal communication, and it also depends entirely on the communication skills of the moderator, how well they're able to run the entire moderation of the panel. So these give you unexpected findings because people try to get to one subject leading to the other, and through that they actually get to the meat of the sandwich, the heart of the matter. And through these dynamic group interactions, you try and derive what is called consumer insight. What is the real motivating factor? So consumer insights are motivating factors which typically reside in one of two domains. It's either a desire or a fear, and these typically both tend to become drivers of consumer action or consumer behavior. The popularity is such that it is synonymous with qualitative research. You mostly find brands and marketers doing focus group discussions, or FGDs as they are popularly called, and many practitioners bring them into play, and they are very frequently conducted in that qualitative space. Now the logistics and costs are, about for 8 to 12 participants, you could have less than 8, you will have insufficient dynamics within the group, and more than 12 you will have too much of noise. So there will be incoherent conversations which you want to avoid. And in the US, typically it lands up to $6,000 to $8,000 to run one particular panel. So this is what it generally does look like. In the Indian context, the prices obviously may differ because of your geography, because of the recruitment costs, because of the money you pay to the moderating agency who provides the moderator, and they run that particular panel for you. So when we are discussing the key considerations when it comes to FGDs, you have the most important thing being homogeneity. Now, homogeneity of the audience set is very important. It needs to have similar demographics, similar psychographics. Psychographics in this case is the thought process, the kind of psyche we expect in that audience, so that they are similarly minded. But then once they start sharing their inputs, individual traits start to take over, and we delve deeper into their individual psyches and understand what one thing is there that also gels with the rest of the audience. And they must be part of the product usage. Here, we try and minimize conflicts through the moderation aspect, and also remove any sort of distractions from side issues. So the moderator's role is important and very relevant here. And you avoid mixing diverse lifestyle groups. For example, you don't mix young professionals, homemakers and retirees all in one group. You try and keep them separate so that the conversations are refined and to that particular homogeneous audience. Now, within the segment specific groups, what you do is you conduct separate focus groups for distinct market segments as well, in case you have more than one segment that you want to reach out to. And for the participant screening criteria, you require that adequate experience with the product or issue is already there, and no prior participation in multiple focus groups, so that there is a clean slate. Their ideas are fresh and there is no bias beforehand, so that their ideas come spontaneously to the table. Now here, why you would say to exclude professional respondents, so that the validity of the response is maintained, so that these people who keep going to multiple number of researches do not show up on your panel, because they tend to steer the conversation towards a direction which is to the liking of what the panel might want to hear. So it is to keep the entire thing without any sort of bias is where it's important to keep it. Now, What therefore we should do is have a well selected homogeneous group and ensure that the conversations are productive with reliable insights coming out of it at the end of the conversation. In terms of the flow, you'll see that first what you'll do is specify the objectives of the qualitative research. You state the objectives of the focus group to that particular team, and you write a screening questionnaire so that you take away any particular person who is not fitting with the group. You develop a moderator's outline so that they know exactly how to operate in the conversation, and then you finally get into the conduction of the FGD. And basis that, you have a report which comes out at the end of the entire exercise. Now, typically the setting and duration is about an hour and a half to build the rapport and explore participants' insights. And then the entire process is also recorded. So, video capture gets people's facial expressions, body movements, but this also adds cost, but at times it comes in handy because you can read a lot of non-verbal cues here. So, this is something which comes in handy for people reviewing the research proceedings later on camera. Clients may observe the entire proceedings through either one-way mirrors or with live video transmission. So, you can have a separate room where the live feed of the entire proceedings go. The role of the moderator is important. They have to establish the rapport necessary and keep the discussions on track. They also have to probe deeper for insights, and they have to ensure that the group doesn't start fighting each other. So, you have to manage the group's dynamics so that the entire conversation is very fruitful. For the moderator, they need to be experts in group dynamics, the topic itself, and they should be clear with the research objectives so that they drive the conversation in the correct path. When you define the objectives, you align it with the marketing research problem. Nabisco is one particular brand which we can take an example of here. What they did in the research is they understood that mothers had a snack purchasing behavior, and so they probed the reasons behind why mothers would go and purchase items which they could then provide their kids as snacks. How do you screen participants? You use these questionnaires we spoke of, and you assess their product familiarity, the usage, and what demographics they hail from. And you select the participants who are fitting that particular target profile. And mothers with young children in the Nabisco example who were serving snacks at least 2 or more times a week were the ones who were selected. Now, you prepare the outline for the moderator. Here, you have to specify topics you want covered, the sequence in which these topics appear in the conversation, how much time you're going to allocate to each particular piece, and if you're going to use any representative visual aids, stimuli, some music, some video, etc. That will help drive the conversation in all. And you ensure consistency across sessions. So, each session, you may have more than one session because you booked the place. So, you may get more than one panel sitting in. So, the moderator actually manages more than one session in that particular setting. The key insight is that through meticulous planning, skilled moderation, and the right setting, you can generate meaningful insights from the focus groups. Now, the point here is that in the FGD process, when you're conducting the particular in-depth discussion, the moderator's responsibilities are first to establish rapport, state the rules for the group's interaction, and set objectives for the discussion. You have to probe the respondents and continuously provoke relevant discussions. When a lot of inputs come in, the role of the moderator is also to summarize the responses and ensure that the group either identifies to certain points or they state that there is a certain amount of disagreement. In order to help facilitate that particular underscoring, you can even run polls within the group if there is a sufficient number of people. Doing it over multiple number of discussions can actually start showing you a certain trend in that particular direction. But then this must be followed. This has to be followed across all groups as a procedure. Post the interview analysis, you review participant responses, their facial responses, their expressions, etc., and body language, which we also referred to earlier as non-verbal cues. And you see what responses are consistent, if there are any new ideas that are thrown up, and any concerns that get highlighted by the consumers. And you typically tend to not get into anything that is numerical in nature. So, like you try and not say most participants thought or participants were divided. So, you try and understand what particular direction the entire conversation is going towards. When you're determining the number of focus groups, the factors you want to consider are what is the nature of the issue, the number of market segments you're trying to cover, the new ideas generated in successive groups, the time and cost constraints. In all, about 6 to 15 groups taken up for that one particular subject for large projects specifically yield predictable insights, because then you'll start seeing a pattern. You'll start seeing patterns across discussions. Also, clients sitting in the observation room, they can pass spot inputs in case they want something to be probed more deeply by the moderator, who then can pick that point up and include that in the conversation. Now, what are the advantages, disadvantages, and where all can we apply FGDs? Strengths wise, you get rich, immediate insights from real customers, and a group interaction triggers a snowball effect. If one person comes up with an idea, the other people in the group may react to the idea, either negating it or expanding upon it, and they can give you creative and unique ideas based on what the initial stimulus was. This can help provide natural human reaction to any specific thought process and help you define which way people would perceive and take that particular conversation. The responses typically are very spontaneous and very frank, candid, and they offer valuable insights and data. The limitations are that you risk treating exploratory findings as conclusive, which is something you should guard against, and the success of any FGD depends heavily on the moderator's skills. So, the moderator has to be talented in order to be able to manage that particular discussion well. The unstructured responses make analysis and interpretation challenging. So, the analysis part also takes a lot of human intellect to actually go through and solve, and you have to look out for a variety of things. So, you have to look out for things said, non-verbal cues like we spoke of, insights, ideas, and snowballing effects. So, all these aspects you need to look at when you are actually probing the analysis of what came off that particular interaction. How do you apply these? You apply these across industries, exploring consumer behaviors, and you keep generating insights on the go. A lot of brands have done this, whether they are in a variety of industries, whether it be music, whether it be FMCG, whether it be consumer durables. So, a lot of organizations come up with this. Universal Music, a very well-known music brand, leverages focus groups to understand consumer preferences when it comes to their new albums, etc. So, they know which particular artist is working, which particular genre of music is working, and the same thing applies to any other industry vertical as well. Now, in terms of the entire FGD aspect being brought online, because today you have that particular functionality, the instant advantage that you get out of it is global reach. You can instantly, sitting in one place, do an FGD that includes people from a wide variety of geographies at one point in time without having to actually physically go there. That accessibility gets you in contact with hard to reach segments like doctors and lawyers who may not have ample amount of time to attend your FGD otherwise. And it also provides a certain amount of convenience. So clients can observe from their home or office without having to actually physically be there. There is enhanced interaction. Why? Because moderators can probe individuals for deeper insights as well. So they can single out, they can highlight certain people who have been more responsive and probe deeper into their inputs. And this also lowers the cost because the venue cost typically comes down. Other additional costs also come down. So traditional focus groups will have these costs which are reduced in the case of the online FGD. So no travel, no facilities required, and no extra video recording because the software itself on which you are conducting the online FGD typically has a recording feature. And there is faster execution, so you can quickly set this up and implement it as well. And the responses are typically fuller as well because participants tend to be less inhibited online. In a real setting with physical proximity, the inhibitions tend to creep in more. Limitations wise, technology can be a barrier because you need to have a computer literate participants, and also data speeds can be a problem. So data speeds can also cause a problem in areas where typically data connectivity can be lossy. Then you have verification challenges because you have to confirm participants' identities and you have to get in traditional recruitment methods before the entire thing starts. And there are lesser physical cues that you can observe. So body language, facial expressions, tone of voice, these things tend to get dimmed down in an online interaction. And the environmental distractions can also increase at the same point in time because you can't control in the setting in which your participant will be sitting in. Again, there are stimulus limitations, so you can't actually get them to touch something or smell something. So fabrics, perfumes, etc. are things you can't test in terms of product testing. And then the client may have a harder time coming in compared to the traditional methods because they may be used to a certain way of working. So there are lots of challenges in this sense which may come up with the online format as well, but each has its own beauty and each has its own limitation. Moving on, there are other aspects which we can use within the entire qualitative research scenario. The next part is depth interviews. Now, depth interviews typically are done one-on-one. So, whilst FGDs are done in groups, depth interviews are one-on-one. Again, these are unstructured and are conducted by skilled interviewers. They tend to uncover motivations, beliefs, attitudes, and feelings. So, this could be about scenarios, about key drivers in their decision-making process, about products and samples, and about purchasing as a practice. In depth interviews, you typically focus on individual responses because speaking with one individual and the group influence is typically taken out of the conversation. These are flexible and can be using tailored questioning based on the respondent replies. So, it may have a cyclic loop. So, you may ask a question, you may get a certain feedback, and basis that you may have another follow-up question which you may generate even at times on the spot. So, the interview process typically starts with broad open-ended questions. So, something like, how do you feel about shopping at departmental stores? And then can keep steering in towards the core subject at hand. It allows respondents to talk freely and steer the discussion while the moderator or the interviewer in this case keeps a very, very light leash on the entire conversation, hemming it towards the objective that is there. And they can use probing techniques to uncover deeper insights. So, they can ask, why do you say that? And get people to explain why they have said something. And if they are not satisfied, they can go on and say, can you elaborate? And would you like to add something else? All of these aspects, they push the interviewee to dig deeper. The more in-depth the conversation, the more detailed the response and the better the insight. So this typically is how key depth interviews are run. And when you want to get success in this, you need to be flexible, have the unstructured format, and actually take cues from the respondents' replies to steer the direction of the conversation. For the interviewer, there are critical responsibilities. You have to stop and never try and appear superior, somebody who is guiding the conversation. You have to allow for the consumer and the interview in this case to continue with their natural responses. You have to establish a certain amount of comfort and ease for the respondent so that they can respond freely without having any hindrance or any bias in their minds. They need to be objective, very personable, and attentive throughout so that they don't lose track and they don't lose the confidence and the focus from the interviewee as well. And you need to ensure that responses go beyond simple brief answers and are expanded into deeper insights. So you ensure that they get expanded into deeper insights. And you have to skillfully probe for these deeper insights, get them to talk about their experiences in probably a storytelling or narrative form. This sort of gives you the entire overlay of the situation which has pushed them towards a certain opinion or pushed them towards a certain behavior or pushed them towards a certain decision. This detailed probing can go on and actually affect why people will probably buy something like an automobile, which is a very heavy duty purchase for anybody. So they'll put in a lot many factors before they actually decide on what to buy. It could also give you better inputs when it comes to sensitive topics, for example, attitudes towards dating, because this is typically very personal. So people may have their inputs on this. Complex consumption experiences are also brought in. For example, perfumes, bath soaps, what their personal usages are, and people have to be allowed to open up to certain conversations in that particular fashion for them to be responsive. Beyond this, you will have professional respondents who come in and you will get industrial marketing research from them because they do the professional interactions on a day in, day out basis. So you will understand nuances of daily work needs. Here, these experts will actually tell you all the steps that they go through to ensure certain tasks get done. Now, for industrial sale purposes, FIs typically, the focused interview formats, they work very well when you've got professional respondents because you understand how their exact day goes and where the particular brand or service being put in is going to make a difference to them. Also, it allows the interviewer to grab hold of competitor insights for the client, where, for example, if you get travel agents' perceptions of airline packages, you understand which airline stacks up well against yours if you are an airline client. So, typically, all of these factors are part of what the interviewer's role are to get hold of information pieces, insights that make it helpful and actionable for the client. Depth interviews also have their own benefits and challenges. So, when it comes to discovering deep insights, it's very helpful and it can work even better than the focus groups because you're getting into the everyday life and nuances of an individual. The attributes are responses which are directly to individuals. It allows free and candid exchange of information because there is no social pressure of being in a group and performing well in that group. You're having a one-to-one conversation with the interviewer. It's ideal for sensitive or socially influenced topics because people tend to at times be shy from responding to these things when put in a group. The challenges are that again, you'll need highly skilled interviewers who are able to drive conversations. Results can definitely be therefore influenced by the skill of the interviewer. And thereafter, whatever inputs come, the data analysis is complex and requires expert interpretation, and maybe even at times a panel of experts. You may have a psychoanalyst, you may have a behavior specialist, you may have somebody who is from the research space and has done enough and more to be able to tell you which particular inputs are worth it and which particular ones are flimsy. And small sample size also, they limit the generalizability of this because each particular interview is an individual effort. So hence you can only do a limited number of interviews. Beyond this, there are other ways to actually get qualitative insights in. Most famous amongst these are projective techniques. Now, what are projective techniques? These obviously, because all qualitative research is typically unstructured, so is this. This is unstructured. And these are indirect methods to uncover motivations, beliefs, attitudes, and feelings. How does one go about it? The purpose of the research may be, in this case, disguised. For example, in focused groups, you may tell them why you are doing a focus group, or in the depth interview, you may do so. But in the case of projective techniques, you may just lead them on. They would be obviously willing because that is what they would have signed up for. But you would lead them on and disguise the true purpose of the research until and unless you come to a point where you can reveal it. Respondents typically interpret others' behaviors rather than their own because that's the easier thing to do, passing a judgment or commentary on somebody else's actions. And you uncover respondents' underlying themes by analysis of ambiguous scenarios. So, you give them certain scenarios where there are two good choices or two bad choices, and then you see how they respond to those good or bad choices, what they choose and why they choose these. This has a very strong psychological foundation. It is actually derived from clinical psychology principles. So, the more ambiguous the situation, the greater is the emotional and attitudinal projection from the individual. So, for example, the US Postal Service, they put out a challenge for boys about 8 to 13 who were actually actively avoiding stamp collection. They used a technique showing a picture of a boy fixing stamps and asked for descriptions for that particular picture. Insights was that stamp collecting was perceived as sissy, something which playful boys who were outgoing, etc., wouldn't do. So, in order to give that entire thing a cool factor, so they managed to put it out in the form of a picture and ask people's inputs on the same. The advertising campaign became very successful and it featured actually a football quarterback. So, the whole aspect of stamp collection being looked at as a sissy activity, somebody who's a weakling, is something they actually covered by putting in somebody who is seen as the opposite of a sissy, a jock, somebody who's macho, somebody who's sporty, somebody who's outgoing, like a football quarterback. So, football, obviously this is American football, but football quarterbacks are typically boys who have better physique and are more athletic, and hence they are not seen as weaklings or sissies. And they actually make the connect with the postal stamp collecting activity, so that they established that the activity was for anybody who had that particular interest rather than being something for people who are weaker of strength in body. Now, in terms of projective techniques, there are quite a few which are doing the rounds. You can take word association. What respondents do here is they state the first word that comes to mind when a stimulus word is mentioned. The stimulus is mentioned by the moderator or interviewer, and from there the conversation really sparks. You can also have sentence completion. Here participants complete incomplete sentences and they reveal underlying thoughts. The sentences may be open-ended. Why open-ended? So that the blanks that are left are something you can fix with a lot of variable inputs. The variable inputs give rise to a scenario where you can actually gauge what is going on in the mind of the consumer. Then people can be shown pictures or cartoons, and respondents describe or interpret ambiguous images or cartoons, and their reaction is then obviously analyzed psychologically to understand what their driving factors or motives are. They can also be put into places where they are doing a certain amount of role playing. Here respondents act like they are somebody else, so it reduces the inhibition and they are freer to project their feelings indirectly, because through the lens of a masking of a character, what they're able to do is showcase what goes on in their mind or in their subconscious without having to feel the guilt of their internal thinking being exposed to somebody else. Then there is the third person technique. Here, participants describe what others think or feel about a situation. Again, this is another masking technique where you ask them, what would so and so have done in a particular scenario, or similar conversations like that, putting them in the shoes of another person and giving them the creative license to think like them the way they understand that particular individual. You remember René Descartes' quote we used earlier in the presentation, which was about how we see the world we can describe. So the description is pre-made in consumer's mind and then it plays out in the response formats. Now, the advantages and disadvantages of this: advantages wise, it gives extremely rich insights, it uncovers deep-seated emotions and subconscious thoughts as well. It has minimized bias because the disguised purpose reduces the response influence on results, and you get unique data because when you're exploring sensitive topics or socially constrained behaviors, you get a lot of deeper insights because people don't have to respond at times as their own self. They can choose to take on the mask of being in somebody else's shoes, and that is really helpful in uncovering hidden truths. The challenges here are you need skill again to interpret these. So, analysts who are extremely skilled are required to decode the results, and these typically have high costs because they are more expensive than direct methods. In terms of what the findings are, there are certain validity concerns because there is subjective interpretation. So, now it depends entirely on the expert analytics person. So, this is key again to ensure that you get comprehensive findings out of a exploratory research which is indirect in nature. And there is a shred of ambiguity again. Results may vary widely depending on respondent interpretations and what typically comes to mind at that point in time. So, it is the skill of the moderator or the interviewer who can manage this better, and also the analytics person who can gauge the real response that is worth its while to capture from the entire conversation. Other observation techniques are also there, where we've got ethnography. Now, ethnography is typically observing people in their natural environment and understanding a culture or phenomenon. In terms of methods, there could be depth interviews which can be conducted. You can just observe a participant. So, here researchers immerse themselves in the environment of the respondent, and they could also have audio and video recordings, obviously with permission, and you capture authentic behaviors and interactions without having to actually go delve deeper into conversations. You just observe people and get these inputs. Netnography is an offshoot of ethnography, and it typically adapts ethnographic techniques for online communities, people who can't physically make it to the conversation. The good features of this are that it uses naturally occurring online data, and researcher presence does not influence the outcomes because you've got that particular mask in place. So, people do not have the fear to respond as themselves, and they can be freer in the responses. There is another type called mystery shopping. Here, the purpose is to elevate customer-employee interactions and marketing variables, for example, the effect of prices and displays. So, trained observers pose as customers, and the data collected by questioning staff, observing and noting details in them is then sent back to the client panel. Now, there are certain other important considerations when getting into the entire world of subjective, exploratory, qualitative research. Let's look at international qualitative marketing research as well. First and foremost, it is crucial here that the researcher is unfamiliar with foreign markets is something that needs to be understood. So, the effort required is more, because if there is a new locale, then researchers must get into the mindset of that particular locale, without which it won't be very successful. It also reveals differences between domestic and foreign markets as well. In terms of other kinds of focus groups, you will see that applications across this are common in industrialized countries, and the moderators required need to be proficient in that particular methodology and familiar with local language, culture and social patterns, so that they are able to gel well with that particular group. Key observations in this case are there are lots of verbal and non-verbal cues. Intonations, expressions and gestures are very easily given away. Then in terms of group size, you may vary by region. For example, 7 participants in Asia is typically found to be optimal. Alternatives wise, in terms of depth interviews, you find this suitable in regions like the Middle East or Far East, where group discussions may be culturally sensitive, and hence you may have to work it along those lines, the interview aspect. Again, example wise, there was a brand called Visit Britain, which used focus groups to study the spa market in the UK, and then they came up with their campaigns accordingly. And with today's advent of technology, social media has started playing a very strong and vast role inside qualitative marketing research. Here, the advantages are that social networks provide free and vast participant tools, and they provide private online communities where you can have extended focus groups. Why these are important is because they offer membership. So, when it is a membership, people who fall into that particular space are the ones you are going to test for. And in terms of facilitation, expert moderators just ensure that there is sufficient engagement. Example was JCPenney, the store. They effectively use such a community to actually push forth their products and test them out before they actually ran it in the markets. Now, various things you can observe here. Participant blogs or approach are where people define topics and have participant blogs, which are 8 to 60 participants in each go. Again, duration wise, these typically last a week to about 4 weeks. So, it could take the good part of a month to actually see a project through. And in terms of outcomes, it gives you rich insight and a very qualitative blog analysis. Now, depth interviews done over social media, where examples like Burger King exist, people have secretly filmed customers reacting to the discontinuation of the Whopper, and their expressions, their body language, etc., was all noted. Insights about nostalgia and the childhood memories which people have seen, they create the inputs for an informed marketing campaign. Now, in terms of online projective techniques, you leverage unstructured social media interactions. For example, GlaxoSmithKline, when they were launching Ali, they used sentence completion and photo sharing to uncover their frustrations and motivations when it comes to how respondents would respond to these things. And Ali managed to target the right segment, and because of this, they actually achieved $155 million in revenue in 6 weeks. And in terms of data overload, you can actually go the wrong way as well. So, Chevy Apprentice campaign received 22,000 submissions requiring extensive analysis. So, it depends on who you are exposing this to and how well you are getting their inputs on record. Then, obviously, there are ethical concerns as well. You have to at times disguise the research purpose. So, this on-whiz will require a cover story to avoid any sort of bias. Also, there is a risk that it may violate respondents' right to know and may cause psychological harm. So, you have to be very clear whether you want to go this route or not. Solutions wise, inform respondents upfront about any disguised purposes and conduct debriefing sessions post the research so that they are made aware of what went on. Then there are deceptive procedures. For example, misrepresenting clients as participants during the observation can lead to very biased inputs. Again, in terms of an ethical guideline, you need to avoid violating privacy and ensure that informed consent is taken from the respondents. When you're recording respondents, you record them without knowledge and consent, and it will raise concerns. So therefore, you need to tell them that they are being put up on camera or microphone. In terms of best practices, you should inform them and obtain prior consent. Post the session, collect the signed permission statements without fail, and you disclose the purpose and the kind of audience that you've been interviewing. You allow participants to refuse this so that it gives a lot of tranquility and a lot of sagaciousness to the entire exercise. You edit the recordings and omit non-consenting individuals from the entire series. And for the respondents' comfort, moderators should avoid pushing respondents into discomfort, and you have to respect the refusal to answer certain questions. General public wise, findings which you get out of this should not be misused, ensuring responsible representation and impact. So that's broadly how you will look at the ethical aspects. Obviously not exhaustive, there may be more, but this gives you a general sense of all things that come into play when it comes to the ethics of it. So in all, qualitative research is exploratory and it gets to the meat of the sandwich. It gets to the underlying factors, the core human insight that works behind the screens and which always marketers are trying to delve into and figure out. So they can be either, like we saw, direct or indirect. And direct methods, when we look at them, like focus groups and depth interviews, they typically go deeper into the subject. They look at it at a group level. So they look at how the idea carries forward in the group and is further delineated. Or inside of an interview, you look at probing inside a consumer's mind to find causal effects and results of the same. Here you check respondents understand the purpose of the research before you go further with them. Focus groups are typically popular and involve group discussions, making it easier for people who are shy about responding to also respond. And depth interviews typically are one-on-one conversations. People who are not extroverts may be easier to speak with because the limited amount of audience helps them open up and speak. Depends again on the skill of the interviewer. Indirect methods known as projective techniques also exist, and they encourage respondents to share their motivations, beliefs and feelings by reacting to ambiguous situations. These techniques are multiple, like word association, sentence completion and role playing. Each of these work well when people are hesitant to provide direct answers. So you have to work your way around when people have these biases. Cultural differences also come in and play a big role in shaping how the groups or interviews are conducted, especially when it comes to international markets. As social media keeps coming up, qualitative research has become more dynamic, offering richer insights, and because digital connectivity is there, so you can actually expand the audience size and gain more inputs all in the same fell swoop. And above all, just remember that it is essential to conduct research ethically, ensuring that the respondents feel comfortable and respected, without which they will seldom part with their privy information. So that is all we had in today's conversation. Going further, since we discussed the conclusive formats of research, we will look into aspects that help you understand how to get conclusive answers from whatever problem solving areas you have outlined during your quali research aspects, which will be picked up in the next series, which is quantitative research, which will also have its own types, its own reasons for it to exist, and a full understanding of how one needs to go deeper and deeper into that particular subject to understand where things are. You'll understand what sample sizes are, how to work with them, and what are scales and implementation metrics. So, until next time, I thank you for being such a lovely audience, and I'll see you for the next series module on quantitative research. Thank you.
Hello, I am Professor A.K. Sharma and I teach sociology in IIT Kanpur. I am taking up a question, what is world population crisis? World population crisis refers to explosive growth of population which occurred during 1950s and 1960s. For millions of years, some people estimate that perhaps man appeared on this planet Earth 5 lakhs years ago. It took these 5 lakhs years for world population to reach first billion in 1820 AD. And that means that the population in ancient times must have been rising at rate 0.000 something percent per year. Now, in 1950s and 1960s in the world, you find that population started growing at rate more than 2% per year. This is what is meant by population crisis. You can imagine that if a population grows or anything grows at 2% per year, then in about 35 years time it can double. And obviously, particularly in the context of less developed countries, it had implications for poverty removal, for employment generation, for maintaining health, improving life expectancy, raising educational levels, etc., etc. The reason behind this population crisis was improvement in life expectancy or improvement in general health standards of populations. You may not be knowing, or you will be surprised to know that about 100 years ago in our country, life expectancy means average age of death or average age of life, whatever you say, of a newly born child was only 20 years, and today it has reached the level of 68 years. Much of this improvement in less developed countries occurred in 1950s and 60s, and therefore, with improvement in health, improvement in life expectancy or average age of birth, average age of death, and population started growing at explosive rates, and people started writing about this. This is population explosion, or this is population crisis. And now one can say that the period of peak growth rate is over, and from 1971 onwards in the world as well as in our country, growth rate of population has started declining. Now, in India, you may like to know what is the current growth rate of India's population. Currently, India's population is growing at 1.5% per year, and the reason is that after sudden or unexpected improvement in health conditions in 50s and 60s, which led to population crisis, we find that today average number of children has also started coming down. So, there was a time when average number of children per woman was around 11 or 12, now it has come down to 2.5, and therefore, the growth rate of India's population has come down to 1.5%, and we can hope that in the future, means in the coming decades, even if nothing changes on the front of fertility or number of children, India's growth rate of population will decrease further and eventually come to a zero level, as said by the 11th 5-year plan of India. And now the major cause of high growth rate of population is not high fertility, but the age distribution of population. So, we have a high percentage of population at the younger ages, and that is the cause of high rate of growth of population. Eventually, when population of India will also age like population of other developed countries, our growth rate will start falling. Thank you. Now, we will meet in the future.